listening to the Barcode Podcast with your host, Chris Glandon, serving cybersecurity straight up with no chaser. Let's hit the bar and grab a drink.
Hey, Tony, what's up, man? This is my buddy Pete. I thought I'd bring him into Barcode to check it out. Pete, this is the infamous Tony the bartender.
Yo, what's going on, Tony?
Pete, nice to meet you. What are you fellas drinking tonight?
I'll just take a cold one.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Oh, you got it.
Thanks, man. Dude, I can't believe I just met the legendary Tony the bartender and he slid me a beer.
Legendary? I don't know about that, but I'll tell you what I do know. If you're into cybersecurity hardcore like these other regular ones around here are, this is the place for you. Only the top security professionals know how to find us. For instance, this hardware hacker from Portland, Oregon just showed up, claimed to have engineered an electronic compass that led him directly to this precise location.
Get out of here.
Yeah, and he doesn't even drink alcohol. So I hooked him up with a killer mocktail. We call it the Kombucha Mule. If you've ever had one, it's really easy to make. Fill a mule mug with crushed ice. Then, if you want that alcoholic edge, you pour in 1.5 ounces of vodka. Otherwise, forget about it. You just throw in a 1/2 ounce of freshly squeezed lime juice and top that off with about 4 ounces of ginger kombucha. Stir it, garnish with a lime wedge.
Thanks, Tony. I'll be sure to check it out.
Man, this guy sounds interesting. Is he still here?
Oh, yeah. He seems like a really cool dude. He's actually posted up down at the end of the bar. He is the one, he's holding soldering iron on my booze bot. Oh, shit. Excuse me, sir.
Oh, shit. Chris, is that who I think it is? I recognize this guy from DEF CON.
Yeah, I think so, man. I knew it was only a matter of time until he found his way here. Let's go hit him up.
Yeah, and do me a favor. Tell that guy not to damage my robotic bartender while you're down there, please. I'll see you all next round.
Joe Grand is a product designer, hardware hacker, former co-host of Discovery Channel's Prototype This, and the founder of Grand Idea Studio. He specializes in creating, exploring, manipulating, and teaching about electronic devices. Also known as Kingpin, Joe is a member of the legendary hacker group L0pht Heavy Industries, where he helped raise awareness of the hacker ethos and the importance of independent security vulnerability research. Joe, thanks for stopping by Barcode, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm also here with Pete Klabe, who's co-hosting with me today. What's going on, Pete?
Hey, what's going on?
So, Joe, first off, if you don't mind, I'm interested to hear about your background and tell me about, when did you first find your passion for engineering and hacking?
Sure. Well, I think even before then, seeing how we're on Barcode and you can't actually see it, but I have my Pentagon mug with Cosmic Cocoa, hot chocolate with a bunch of crushed up mushroom powder for today because it's 11 in the morning here. I don't drink anyway, but even if I was going to drink something like a, crazy virgin cocktail, it's too early in the morning.
Yeah.
I guess it's cocktail time somewhere. So I got involved in electronics and hacking and really kind of discovered my passion when I was 7, which to me seems normal. And, you'll talk to other people of my generation that's sort of maybe 9 years old, 10, 11, they got a computer. But apparently it's not that normal to be introduced that early back in the early 80s, where computers just weren't as ubiquitous as they are now. If you had a computer, you either had a parent that needed one for work, or you were just lucky. I ended up being lucky. I have an older brother and sister. So they were kind of messing around with the computer. It was an Atari 400. And as a kid, I would just kind of watch them. We had a little computer room with a table made out of an old wooden door and, big TV and the computer and a radiator. And I would sit up on the radiator and just watch my brother and sister play games. And mostly my brother. And then they kind of went their own direction doing other things. And I just fell in love with the computer. It was I just loved how you could, play games on it, but I was a horrible gamer, but I liked how you could, connect over the modem to bulletin board systems and trade other games and then trade different types of information. So codes to get free phone calls and passwords to get into different systems. And we would just, over time, as things progressed, just kind of trade information. And it was sort of like, ended up being, by the time I was 12 or 13, the thrill of collecting information and having access to systems and like kind of having this power, even though I wasn't abusing it, just the knowledge of like, I knew how to get free phone calls, get access to the credit bureaus, connect to elevator control systems, like all these random things that were connected to modems. So it wasn't even really internet connected things. It was just like you dial into a system. So I just loved that kind of underground thing. And, at school, I was like the only one that was into that sort of thing. So very much like I'd grown up with a lot of the same kids in school. So they kind of knew like, oh, Joey's a little bit, weird, kind of nerd, whatever. So they kind of accepted it in a way because to them, that's just what I was, but it was definitely not a normal thing. And then at the same time, my brother was into electronics. So he would like fix radios for his friends and stuff. And he had this junk bin full of electronics. So besides using the computer, I would do chores and errands for him in exchange for being able to like pick a piece of electronics out of his junk bin. And then I started figuring out how do electronics work. And I would read electronics magazines and build the projects and then start modifying those. So it really was just this love of everything kind of technological. And it was at such a young age and it just kind of stuck with me. And I knew from that point, like pretty much when I was 7, when I got into this stuff, I knew that this was all I would ever do.
Yeah. So, I mean, how did you learn it as you went? Were you just self-taught? Did you do a lot of reading? Were there magazines out at the time that really walked you through, the architecture of what you're looking at?
Yeah. So from a hacking side, no. Well, not necessarily. So from the sort of like coding side, I had a bunch of books on like Atari Basic, and I would type in programs from magazines. There was Analog Electronics, Analog Magazine, Antic Magazine. So for the home computer world, there was a lot of kind of reference material. So I would type in games and I would change the code and see what happens. Like, can I change the colors? Can I change the sound? And then I started creating my own games. And the books that were sold, like these Atari books, I just remember they would show the different graphics modes kind of in a graph of like, you get 10 pixels by 20 pixels or whatever. And I would draw in on that page what I wanted the graphics to look like. And then I would, type in the data that represents that thing. So using essentially graph paper to graph stuff. And one of the first things I tried to make, well, actually one of the first things I did make, the first thing was a program called Atari K9. And it was a drawing of K9 from Doctor Who, which I think is even on my website as like a little video. And it auto-loaded this program and it drew a picture of K9, the robot dog, and it blinked its nose and made some sounds. And I had programmed that and given it to my cousin on a floppy disk, a 5¼ inch floppy disk. And like, I don't know how many years later, but he ended up, cleaning up his room or whatever when he was older, and he found it and gave it back to me. And then I ripped it onto, a modern computer. And then I tried to make one called Global Thermonuclear War. So based on war games, which came out in 1983 or 84. That didn't get very far, but I had like a cool graphic screen. And I did have one friend that lived up the hill, and his parents had a TRS-80 Model 2 and a 1200 baud Haynes Haynes underwear modem. No, a Haynes direct connect modem, where I had a 300 baud acoustic coupler that you had to like plug your phone into the modem. This was a direct connection into the phone line. So his was 4 times faster. So we would do stuff at his house, and he was more kind of software focused and I was more the hardware focused. So we had a little company called B&G Software for his last name and my last name being Grand. So it was really just a fun, we were 10 years old or something, and just messing around is all it was. And same with the electronic side. There was some electronics magazines I would buy every month at the electronics store and build projects. And then I would do stuff like the Stun Gun project and the Sonic Defender. So all these sort of what I would consider like kind of spy gadget or like, self-defense, cool electronic things. The first circuit board I made was based on a text file. So when you're asking about reference material, at that time with bulletin board systems, you had text files or G files, which were basically, some kid wrote an article about like, it's like the anarchist cookbook. Here's how you make a bomb. Here's how you mess with the telephone system. Here's how you do phone phreaking or credit card fraud or, whatever it is. So lots of different files on things. And so I would read all of those. And if there was any electronics ones, I would build them. So one that I found was what was called a ring busy device, which basically you took just a single resistor of a certain value and placed it in between the ring and the tip, the two lines of a traditional POTS phone line. And that would still let you use the phone. But if somebody tried to call you, it would appear as a busy signal, which was pretty cool, which meant that you could still use your phone and do your war dialing and call all these different numbers on the, out. And most of the time a human's going to answer and get mad. But if for some, in kind of later years when they had *69 or they could call you back, it would just be a busy signal, which was awesome.
Which is what you wanted.
No, exactly. You didn't want them calling you back. And I used it also in school. I would get in trouble a lot and I would turn it on at night because normally the teachers would call in the evening when they know the parents are home. So I would turn that on at night so the teachers couldn't call my house and then I would flip it off. I had a little switch on it. So that was, a great thing. And then my parents were like, oh, that's actually really cool. Let's turn it on during dinner so we don't get like spam calls. So they actually appreciated the fact that not only the teachers weren't calling, but then we weren't getting random calls at night. So that's sort of like seeing how you can create stuff and affect the world. Like that stuck with me. And that was really like what just kind of sent me on the way.
Accolades for your hijinks. That's
yeah.
Approval from your parents. That's awesome.
Yeah. That, and that's a big thing too. Back then, I definitely had, I would say I had support from them, but it was more of a lack of non-support. So they were sort of like, oh, Joe, I was called Joey back in the day. So, oh, Joey's up in the computer room. Right. And I would be there from the second I got home from school at 2 p.m. I'd be there until dinner time. I'd come down. Maybe after dinner, they would let me go back up. But it's sort of like, oh, he's in the computer room. So they let me use the computer, but they didn't know what I was doing. So it wasn't like they were full on supporting me. Like, they just weren't stopping me from doing stuff.
Well, at that time, it's almost like, innocence too, right? You're not in the street causing trouble. And at that time, nobody really thought of the danger involved or the risk involved with that.
It was a lot different. And it still was really like, mostly just mischievous kids. And as I got older, 13, 14, 15, I was causing trouble in the streets, in Boston, as you will, skateboarding and all sorts of stuff, just kind of being a general kind of punk ass, kid. And then at the same time doing that stuff from a sort of technological perspective on the computer systems, because as I got older, then like hacker groups formed and I was part of one called Renegade Legion. And then you had other groups in other areas. You'd write text files and like, kind of brag about who had the most text files and who had the coolest information. Which to me seems like a kind of typical teenage thing, right? Like as you get into the teenage years, you form these kind of cliques, whether you're a jock or a theater person or whatever, right? At least back then, that's how that sort of grouping was. So I was, in the computer world, and then within the computer world, I wanted to be, I wanted to have a good reputation of releasing information. So it just was like, it was kind of like the Wild West, and there was no ulterior motive. There was no like, at least for me, I wasn't in it to make money. I was just a kid. Like I just love doing the stuff and I love building projects. I knew I wanted to be an engineer. I tell this story, like, people always ask like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And when I was a kid, I'm like, I'm going to be an engineer. And people are like, what? Like, what? Usually it's like a firefighter or astronaut or something. And they're like, engineer. I'm like, yeah, I want to build stuff. So it just was a natural, for me, just a natural thing. And it's amazing that I still get to do essentially what I was doing as a kid, and have a career out of it. Right. So it's really mind blowing. I do like to say too, that I was a technological juvenile delinquent. That's kind of like the term I use to let people realize like, like you kind of think juvenile delinquent on the outside world. It's the same thing of like, at some point I just started causing a little more mischief than I probably should have.
Now you talked about the hacker group. What was the name of it?
That one was called Renegade Legion.
Renegade Legion.
And if you go to textfiles.com, Jason Scott has a website that he's archived essentially every text file that was on, every bulletin board system back in the day. I guess I shouldn't say every, but almost every text file. So you can go and find Renegade Legion text files. And there was another group I was involved in that was sort of a joke group based on that, which was Legion of Shram Today. And Then I joined one, which was more of the Boston area hackers, restricted data transmissions, which ended up turning into the L0pht, which then ended up having more of a kind of, public presence. But yeah, it was all about like forming relationships with hackers that you met online. And then, also for communication back then, it wasn't, there may have been IRC sort of later on in the 90s, but in the 80s, there were some chat systems through TimeNet that I remember. Parmaster was on there, who is still around. But we were mostly communicating over the phone. So we had, we met on the bulletin board systems, but then we would have like these massive party lines. And those generally sometimes somebody would just have three-way calling on their house and you could call a couple people.
Yeah.
Or if you had multiple people with three-way calling, you'd call multiple people and have a party line. But we were doing mostly what were called Alliance teleconferences, which were an AT&T service intended for like businesses to use to get all their employees to have a party talk, right? A conference call. And this, it turns out, was like, I think Jason Scott said it was like $5 per minute per line. And we would I would ride my bike into Boston, use my lineman handset to clip on to like open up a phone can in an alleyway behind an apartment building, clip onto some random phone number, start the teleconference. So it would be billed to that person and then transfer control to a friend of mine. And then I would ride home, call into the teleconference, and we would stay on these things for 10, 12 hours at a time. And there would be, 4 people, 8 people, 12 people. So if you imagine the cost, somebody gets that bill and they're like, oh my God. But we never really thought about that. This was age 14, 15, 16 is when I got into that. And
did you ever get caught?
Well, not directly. I'll mention that in a second. And what we thought about was like, we knew it was being billed to somebody, but it was like, we justified it as AT&T is a huge faceless corporation. They're charging too much. Information needs to be free. We should be allowed to talk, all of these things. And, all of us were already using phone codes, corporate calling cards and stuff to get free phone calls because we wanted to communicate. And yes, the person who owned the phone line for, maybe a couple days freaks out, but they would just call AT&T and get a refund. Yeah. So we kind of justified it that way. As far as getting caught, it's funny because every phone number that dials into those teleconferences gets logged. So they knew who people were. And I did get a couple phone calls directly back from like an AT&T Alliance teleconference operator asking like, was this phone number on the teleconference from this day? And I have a recording of one of them. They actually gave the name because they were trying to figure out like who was responsible for starting it. And we all only knew each other by our hacker handles. And, the operator calls me and she's like, do you recognize this phone number, 313, blah, 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 from Michigan, the name of real name, not hacker name. I'm like, holy shit. Like they really know. So a couple people did get busted for running those conferences, but I think in general, I definitely got lucky and a lot of other people just got lucky that they didn't pursue it. And I think it was probably one of those things of like, you see some kids hanging out in the park and maybe not anymore. I don't know, but like spray painting something, right? It's like you slap them on the wrist or you don't even, or whatever, you kick them out of the park. Like you don't make a big deal out of it. I think AT&T was probably just accepted the fact that people were abusing it and only went after the things that were like major,
real crimes,
losses or something. Yeah. Crimes. Like, when it got up to something expensive or they did something, illegal on the phone line, like we would call operators, we'd call like directory assistants in all these different states and then connect them all together on the phone lines. And they'd start talking and they'd be like, directory assistants, Boston, directory assistants, California. How can I help you? And they're all like, wait a second, how did we get linked? And, we'd call girls that we had crushes on. And we would call people we didn't like. We would call radio stations. It was just a very, it was like mostly boys. We had a couple girls on there also, but it was mostly teenage boys just kind of having a community is what it was. Right. And it felt really cool, like to call in and talk to Garfield in Michigan and all these different people, that you never met in person, but you still had this bond and eventually I met some of them But it was just really cool. Jeff Moss, actually, the Dark Tangent, he had a DEF CON voice bridge that he made, and that was more West Coast focused. But you could call in, and it was a very similar thing. He was hosting it. You could call in and chat with other hackers without meeting them, and like so it was really amazing. And it sort of taught me that the sort of somebody is somebody's worth, or somebody should be based on their actions and what they say and what they do, not by what they look like, not by what religion they are, not by what sex they are or identify with, or any of that stuff, right? It's like completely faceless, and you learn about them in a much deeper level without having these preconceived notions. And as a kid, that's really powerful. And same thing with bulletin board systems, when we would have like go to somebody, the sysops house to do game copying parties, where you have this vision in your head of what these people look like because you're communicating with them all the time. And then you go and see them, and it's like, I had no idea. It's like the New York Times art. There was a drawing once for the New York Times. It was like, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. And that was like in 1990 something. And like, that was what made that early community so special. Is it was just straight up the passion and the love of the mischief and doing things that other people weren't doing.
Do you think that it's a little bit different now compared to when you were first dialing into the bulletin board systems? Those who wanted to connect and get online, they had an interest in the technology and everything. But today, now, internet's so accessible that I think the ability to be anonymous and faceless in a lot of ways is much more easily abused, and we see it a lot more. Is the loss of something like that, or the presence of more people getting online, kind of changing how you feel about that in terms of your accomplishment should still be anonymous, or that's still the best way to communicate online?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So it's kind of hard to tell, because every youth group or youth movement has like a different way of communicating and expressing themselves and stuff, right? So if you look at like the general population of kids now, it was TikTok for a while, and now it's something else. And even like the use of emojis, like I'm an old guy, I use the, LOL emoji, but that doesn't mean what I think it does to a kid. So it's hard for me to know, if there are these kind of underground movements happening. What I tend to get a sense of, especially because of social media and this immediate gratification sort of thing, is more people are focused on like building a brand around themselves. And it's like, look, mom, look how smart I am. I'm giving a talk. I'm on the news. I'm this and that. And those are always great things, but it shouldn't be the purpose, right? The purpose should be the passion. And then what comes out of that, if you have an opportunity to be on a stage like that, to share that passion, that's what's important. It's not trying to see how many followers you have, blah, 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 blah. So I don't really know. I do think, back then, because you had to have an interest in the technology, or in at least access into the computer systems, you had to have somewhat of that mindset, the technological mindset, the curiosity of wanting to learn something in the nature of being able to be self-directed and self-taught. I do get a lot of emails now of people like, how do I become a hacker? Like, you make it look fun, which is cool. That's the point. But it's like, how do I become a hacker? And it's kind of like, well, I can't teach you to become a hacker. Like, that's a mindset. You can use a tool, you can run a script, you can solder and desolder and do all these things and follow other people's directions, which is exactly how you should start, which is how I started. But you have to, it's the mindset, not the process. So you have to really have that curiosity and the questioning of authority and, or authoritarian figures or authoritative figures, whether it's a teacher or a government or an institution or a process or whatever. Just kind of that side, which I don't know if that exists, because you have 30,000 people at DEF CON, and a lot of the people coming in might just be interested in the industry. It is a career path now, so it's hard to tell. You'd probably be better off asking somebody who is coming up in it now how their view is of it. But seeing the transition has been interesting, and the more people that we get in the industry, the better. I just hope that it maintains some of that real passion of the technology, even as technologies change. you can still hack on anything, right? You can still be curious about anything. The resources are way greater. That just means there's more opportunities.
Yeah, I think you said before, you're not dumpster diving anymore. You can just look everything up on Google.
Yeah, except, I mean, I still look in trash piles once in a while. When I was in San Francisco, it was much more common. People would actually, I think now because of the pandemic, it kind of, there's this resurgence of exchanging trash, of like putting stuff on the street and then finding something else. So that does still happen. But yeah, like, when I was a kid and I would want to get passwords into, the AT&T Cosmos database or ESS switch, or if I wanted to get ESN min pairs to clone cell phones, I would just jump into a dumpster. I'd go to like the Cellular One dumpster and put on, actually, I wasn't even wearing gloves at first. Then my parents yelled at me and I would start wearing gloves. They're like, there could be needles in those bags. I'm like, whatever, but they're totally right. Like jumping in a dumpster is the most disgusting thing because you just don't know what else is in there besides the papers you want. But we'd, open up the trash bags and grab the papers and dry them out because there'd be coffee on it or whatever and get information. And, there is information online, but stuff like that would probably, nowadays, it would be like, okay, it's on some database that I need to trick somebody into giving me access to. But the physical dumpster diving was just part of the fun, man. I mean, it was such a thrill and such a thing where people are like, you go in dumpsters. And again, my parents knew, like, just be careful, like, don't get poked with anything. And if my kids wanted to jump in a dumpster now, I'd be like, okay, be careful. And actually we did a couple months ago, there was some construction going on and I climbed up the dumpster and looked in. So, but that's the mindset, right? It's like, that's sort of, most people, my wife is like, that's gross. Why would you even do that? I'm like, there could be some treasure in there, like something cool. And that's just how I think, because I'm always just kind of on the lookout for stuff like that. But I don't think a lot of people are like that.
I don't know how my wife would react if I start, because I don't jump into, I've never really dumpster dive. I've never done that. But just an adult going into a dumpster without a purpose, but just to see what treasures in there.
Yeah. And like, it's definitely, my perception of it has definitely, like, I'm definitely more aware of, if I jump in there, what's going to be in there. And it might not be what I think. There'd be like rats and stuff. But as a kid, I didn't really care. I wanted the thrown out cell phones, the broken cell phones. I wanted all the information. What came out of that is like, if there was a rat, whatever, my adrenaline was so high, it didn't matter. And nowadays I'd be like, ew, like a rat, I would maybe reach in and get the bag or something.
Yeah. Now you just go digital dumpster diving, where you can identify a target on Facebook and just get your information there.
Yeah. It's a lot of the OSINT, OSINT, like, open source intelligence types of stuff. And that's actually when I teach classes on hardware hacking, that's one of the things before even like hacking on a product is doing this whole information gathering phase, which used to be more physical and you go through the dumpsters. But now it's like, companies are posting not only like marketing data sheets and stuff to show off how smart they are in their product, which you can glean information from, but they have administration manuals and technical manuals that are intended not for end users, but for the maintenance people or engineers that are implementing something into their system. So we can find all that information. Sometimes it just takes a little more digging. But yeah, I mean, that's the type of, there's so much stuff out there. And maybe you don't use Google search, you use like Baidu for China. And like all, depending on what you're trying to get. So yeah, there's a huge amount of information and lots of ways people can get it and then sort of follow whatever path they want to go on.
Let me ask you this then. If you were growing up in today's era with the same passion and level of curiosity for electronics and hardware hacking that you had as a kid, what damage could you really do? How do you think your mindset from then would have applied in today's world?
That's really funny. My wife, we were just talking about that the other day. And my kids are not really into that side, sort of the hacker mischievous side. Like they're huge into gaming and doing some like Minecraft mods and stuff. And they want to learn coding for that. But yeah, I mean, thinking of like the mischievous stuff that I like to do, I would be all over the SCADA stuff, traffic infrastructure. So, traffic lights, anything that controls a physical thing, I think would be hilarious to mess with. And, it's like with the colonial, gas line kind of hack, which is in air quotes. There's so many systems that are just like back in the day, there were systems connected to modems that you could just connect to completely insecure. There are so many systems now, especially this infrastructure related stuff that you can just find online and connect to. And the network security is so horrendously bad. It's like, what the fuck have we been doing for the past 25 years that hasn't translated, right? It's like, what is going on? Because the same concepts that I grew up doing are still valid. It's just a different technology. And the ones that I grew up doing, I found papers from the 60s that were the same thing, sniffing signals, accessing unprotected computer system. All of this stuff is not new, So I think it would just be a little more elevated because more stuff is connected online. But I think I always liked just messing with people, right? So like I would turn off the automatic doors that go into our local grocery store. So, you walk through and it's going to open for you. So I would go on the inside and turn the switch off and you'd see people walk into the door. So it's like, I would basically be doing the equivalent of that with modern day technology. The problem is because of the laws and because the sort of notoriety and the bad meme of hackers and what real damage could be done, which I would never, hack into some, medical equipment or things that would actually harm people, because I'm just not like that. But just the fact that the awareness is there, the lawmakers are there ready to pounce on you. Like I did get arrested when I was a kid and luckily got let off and did not get prosecuted. The older people did, but I didn't, which really changed the direction of my life. But nowadays, I don't think I would be so lucky, right? They'd want to make an example. It would be front page news. 15-year-old kid hacks, whatever. And the problem is that stifles a lot of curiosity because there are kids that want to mess around with this stuff and maybe are a little worried about getting in trouble for doing it. And I feel like you need to really push the limits, not only to understand what's going on, but just to sort of see what the world is like. And a lot of kids that maybe would be doing that stuff, or kids that get in trouble for it and then they're prevented from using computers, is completely the wrong approach, because those are the ones that are going to be the next generation to hopefully start securing systems and do all of that. But I would definitely, like, if I had kids that were into that stuff, I would be a lot more nervous of them like actually getting in real trouble. So
I think like a lot of companies still offer they offer now what they didn't have back then to get around the more legal impact consequence of the actions. They have bug bounties and vulnerability disclosure programs. Is that valuable, you think, for the 15-year-old that wants to do this kind of stuff and is afraid of the consequences? Or
yeah, I think that's huge. That's a great point. A lot of the bug bounties, people complain like, oh, it's, you only get X amount of dollars and that would be 100 hours of my work, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, for somebody looking to do it in a way that they're not going to get in trouble and they get to find some cool vulnerability and disclose that in a safe way is awesome. And I think any company that has bug bounties or is even aware just of the fact that people want to hack their systems and potentially contribute some fix or something, like they should all be applauded, because it really is something that's important. And, like at the Loft, we basically, which was our clubhouse, we would set up our own networks and kind of hack on stuff inside. So we weren't damaging anybody. And having these bug bounties is the same sort of thing. Like you could set up your own environment at home in your bedroom or your lab or whatever. But if you want to go after a real product, you can do that. And as long as you follow the guidelines of these companies. And I think that's great for everybody, right? And it's like, and if you're a teenager and you can score a bug bounty, like that's huge from a bragging perspective, right? You get to tell your friends, you get some money out of it. And then because it is actually a career path now, like that just gives you some more cred that you can use later on. But like I mentioned, I just hope that the fame and the money is not the driving factor. It's the passion and the desire to educate people and educate these companies and make things more secure. And all the other stuff comes out of it is like the bonus, right? It's like the frosting.
Yeah. I hope that there's a comparison between what that is, what it exists today for the people who are participating in those programs, and what you had. You talked about your collection of text files that you would aggregate, and it's kind of like I see a lot of similarities there, and I hope that still exists for those that have that mindset.
Yeah. And then, going back to all of the different resources, like somebody can now look up and see what all existing bugs are for a product or existing exploits or CVE lists or whatever, and then learn from those and replicate those and try them on other products. And it's something that I've started really realizing recently. Like I always say, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Like all of us are doing things probably that have been done before, maybe a little bit differently. And then we share that and somebody else does it, but none of us are like the beginning. Like we're all building on each other, and that's how this community is growing and becoming so great. And there's nothing wrong with replicating somebody's work and learning from it. And like a great example of that is just currently I'm working on a project that isn't public yet, but we're filming a pilot in a couple of weeks around it. And for part of this work, for me to kind of learn this particular technique, which I hadn't really been super familiar with, doing some fault injection and stuff, voltage glitching, I set out to replicate a bunch of existing work that was out there. And I kind of had this imposter syndrome of like, well, I'm lame because I'm copying this work. But by doing that, you learn all these different things about it. And then what ended up happening is some of the work I wasn't able to replicate, but I stumbled upon a different method that did work. And that's when I realized, like, yes, that's the natural progression, right? And now I have so much more knowledge of what's going on because I was able to learn from other people and then add my own flavor to it. And now there's another bit that I can, publicly release and share with other people that they can go use. So it was like that moment of like, yes, it's okay to copy, again, in quotes, like someone's effort and then build on that. As long as you're not just copying it and taking credit for what already existed, right? But it's like putting something new into the world, and it's okay to use what already is out there first. You don't have to start from scratch and recreate the wheel every single time.
I would look at it as progression, progressing in what you know as an engineer, and then maybe applying what you know and your expertise to that secondary thing that you may be, have to learn.
It's all learning. And if you think about like the standard scientific process, scientific papers come out with the intent of people being able to replicate their work and peer review and all of this stuff. And it's such an important piece, at least for me, being able to do it and learn from it. Some people learn, better by reading a report and then doing something with it. But it's such it's such a huge part. And it's something that really people should be kind of applauded for or kind of push towards that. Of like, it's okay. Like, don't feel like you have to always have some brand new, O-Day, whatever. Like nobody's ever going to know everything. And I'm lucky in the fact that I know that like my knowledge is limited to electronics and hardware. And, that's kind of it. But with the security world, there's so much going on. There's no way, like I could probably learn web hacking, network stuff, but that's not my passion. Right. But if you find something that is your passion, you're never going to know everything, even if you've been doing this for a long time. So there's always something new to learn. And that's something to keep in mind too, is like, if you have that hacker mindset and that curiosity, like you always want to learn. And I've always wanted to learn this particular technique, but never really had a reason and kind of just kept pushing it off because I knew it was technically complex. And then starting to do it, it's like, wow. And I kind of distill it in my brain and process it. And now it's like, okay, I get it. And it, I've learned so many things about myself and the process as I'm doing it. Cause it was a big roller coaster ride of, trial and error and failure and success and then failure again. And like, what is going on? And that's the learning process. Right. And I came out of it the other end, like much, much more excited about that technology, much more confident in my approach, which sometimes is very rigid. So I had to kind of change that a little bit to accept the fact that things are going to fail more often. And that's part of it. Like, it's just hacking, I think, should be equated to like a constant learning process. And it's okay to learn new things and to not know, right? Or to have somebody that maybe knows something more. Whereas a kid with the hacker groups, it was always like, we want to be the best, even though that's, clearly never possible. but that's my old age speaking of like, yeah, it's great to learn from other things because that's how I did it originally, and it helped me. And like,
yeah, well, if you mentally think you're going to hit a wall, that's not good. You know what I mean?
And, but I really had that case of imposter syndrome of like, do I deserve to do this? Like, do I have the skill to do this? And I was kind of questioning my own kind of life of like, what am I doing with my, life of hacking? And that's something that, the whole mental health aspect of the hacker community, of the InfoSec cyber security community is huge. So that was something where it's like, okay, the imposter syndrome is just like my mind telling me something that I'm going to ignore, and I'm going to try this process, and I'm going to build on this work and see what happens, and like just push that to the side, and it's and it worked out. So yeah, there's just it's okay to keep learning, and you're never going to know everything, and I'm definitely okay with that.
That's an awesome perspective. I want to know what your smart home consists of. What does that look like? That's going to be an easy answer. So my smart home consists of an alarm system, and that's it. I was not expecting that.
Yeah.
No, I'm sort of a technology curmudgeon. It's really interesting. Like, I'm fascinated with a lot of technology, right? But more on the tearing it apart and manipulating it side and screwing with it side. But I'm very averse to having cameras in the house, microphones in the house, tracking devices in the house, because I'm still a hacker. I'm a paranoid hacker. I grew up in a world where, that was having a camera in your house was like having Hal staring at you all the time. And it from 2001, like it was surreal. It was like 1984. And, reading 2600 magazine, Emmanuel Goldstein got his name from 1984, the publisher of an editor of the magazine. Like that was one of our kind of Bibles. Every month we would get that, or every quarter. So just the thought of implementing a lot of technology in the house just doesn't appeal to me. And so we don't have any smart devices. As far as network connected, like nothing outward facing that we know of. If anybody finds something, please tell me. And yeah, we just keep it very simple, which is something that I pass on to my kids as well, because they're getting up on the age where they want to be online and social media and this and that. And it's like, if you're not contributing online into social media, it's almost like you don't exist, especially in your social circle and stuff. And even me, like I don't contribute to conversations and stuff online a lot of times, mostly because it stresses me out and I would rather just focus on doing what I enjoy. But for a younger generation, like if they're not online, they basically are not there. So there's that balance of like, how can you do social stuff and network, online presence without it affecting your mental health, your everything, like, and to still let you do what you love to do. So we're starting to get into those conversations. And I think that the IoT kind of network connected smart devices stuff all falls into that. It's like Bruce Schneier has his book, Data in Goliath, which is older now. He has some other books too, but it's, we know what these large corporations are doing with our browsing habits, with our data, all these services, they're not doing this as favors to us. Right. And we know that, at least as hackers, we know that. Every time I do a Google search, it's like, all right, now that's in some log. So, I use the Tor browser, I'll use VPNs. And it's just, to me, it's like a very slimy, dirty place where every technology has an ulterior motive. And to have a device in my house that I go, hey, Alexa, who is Joe Grand? Like, that's weird. I don't want it listening to me. Even if a company is like, but it only listens when you wake it up with, hey, Alexa, like that's bullshit. It has to listen enough for you to say, hey, Alexa in the first place. And you always have to have this cynical mindset of like, why would you put trust in a giant corporation that doesn't have your personal interest in mind? And that comes from the hacker, mindset and in my experience in the L0pht and kind of starting to deal with larger corporations. So yeah, I mean, I'm definitely technology minimalist, using only what's necessary and keeping it as clean and simple as possible, that I can still get my work done, but do it in a way that is comfortable and, not disruptive or distractive or putting my family at risk by being spied on and stuff.
If you were to let it in, what would it take? And
nothing.
Nothing at all.
No, it's
if you owned like if it was your own infrastructure, like open source program, you knew the code, you ran the service yourself.
No.
Wow.
There's too many issues from, even if it's open source, there's just too many potential security issues. There's too much potential of misuse of the data or the information. And, some people might be like, well, he's stupid. He's crazy. Why? The technology is so assistive and helpful. And I think about it as like when we were trying to get my grandmother to use a microwave, where she was like, she had the stove and the oven, and she's like, no way, I'm not using a microwave. But then she actually got a microwave, and she's like, oh, this is cool. I can like reheat my food. So I may be right in between there, but I would never, I would just never implement that stuff. Like it just doesn't interest me. And I just know too much about how these companies are designing the products and what they're doing with stuff. It's like, I feel like when you do a Google search and then you see an advertisement for something similar come up on your TV, like a completely unrelated device, it should be like a pretty serious wake up call. And like, we're watching TV and like, I can see what my wife is searching based on the ads that come up. And what's also weird is like, there are a lot of like, medications and stuff for middle-aged people, which is also terrifying because technically I'm a middle-aged person. So all of that stuff is just like, it's like sickening, right? I mean, to me, it's disgusting. And I never trusted big corporations, and I wouldn't change that now, even if somebody was like, it's totally secure, or like, take a lot of money to put this stuff in your house. Like, no, it's not going to happen.
Dependence on cloud really changes a lot of things too. Like, and the Wired video is great. And if you haven't watched it, go check that out. Wired did a video with Joe, how he makes a compass that finds the nearest pizza place. But in the video, you talk about how you have to integrate this with a search engine API that tells you where the pizza place is.
Yeah, and I had never used the Google API before, and don't use a lot of Google services anyway. So that was a new thing of sort of building a device that did track you to find out where your location was, so it could send it to Google to find out where the nearest pizza place was. But that was like a hobbyist sort of project that people can learn from and build from to do stuff. Like I couldn't in good conscience build anything like that for sale or something like that, like to commercialize it. Like no, but like to show people, here's how a GPS works, and here's how the Google API works, or here's how, mustache templates work for JSON format to send to whatever internet service. Like that's all stuff that I learned along the way. But yeah, I mean, it's a cool looking pizza compass, but it's still, if you think about it, like a kind of creepy, portable tracking device with blinky lights on it.
And that software is open source. So technically I could adjust that query to point me to beer if I wanted to.
You could definitely point it to beer. You could point it to anything that you want, or you could hard code coordinates if you didn't want, to send your coordinates outward. It would just compute the math based on your GPS coordinates and then your hard coded coordinates all locally on the device. So there's a lot you can do with it. And yeah, I mean, again, that whole thing was just to show the engineering process or the development process of going from prototype to production. And Wired had just contacted me and they were interested in like, can we film you doing something? And I'm like, well, I had this idea, and they're like, great, let's do it. Like, how long is it going to take? And I'm like, I don't know, a couple of weeks. They're like, okay, you have 3 weeks. Like, we'll film you the first day with a camera crew, and then we'll have you film everything else. And then the final day we'll have the camera crew come back. And that's what we did. And it was fun. And that's, what's funny is like, that's just one of a million things I've worked on. And it's one of the most kind of useless and kind of silly and cheesy kind of things. But at the same time, because it's entertaining and they did a great job making the video and making a story out of it, people can learn from that and then either use the stuff that I've released online to build from, or just be like, oh, engineering's awesome. Like I want to build something completely different, but now I understand a little bit about the process to do it.
Yeah. So my bartender here just yelled out last call. You got time for one more?
Sure. Let's do it.
All right. If you opened a cybersecurity themed bar, what would the name be, and what would your signature drink be called?
So a name that, a drink that popped into my head. I would call the drink the Solder Smash. And that was, I just did a live hardware hacking challenge for Colonel Con a couple weeks ago, and it was all online, and they presented me with a hardware challenge to, solder and hack on. And as part of that sort of lead up, they had asked me, if I was a superhero, what would my superpower be? And I said solder smash. And I think that's an awesome name for a drink also. Yeah. So that's why I'm going to reuse it as that. For the actual name of a bar, Dev Null just popped into my head. So I think I'll just have to go with that.
I love that.
So go to Dev Null and get your solder smash.
That almost sounds real.
Copyright 2021 Joe Grand.
Now, is that going to be in Portland?
Yeah, that would be in Portland.
Okay.
And it would have to be like, microbrew and handmade kombucha and, artisanal pickles and tater tots, all that stuff.
Nice. We just made a Kombucha Mule, and it's specifically for you. We added it on the drink menu.
Oh, thank you.
Your drink. Yeah,
it.
Absolutely.
What'd you name it?
We named it the Grand Mule.
Nice. I'm going there right now. I'm going to make it.
Nice, man. Well, Joe, thanks for your time today. I personally learned a lot, and I'm sure my audience did as well. Where can our listeners go to find you online and connect with you online?
Yeah. So my website is grandideastudio.com. I am updating the website so that will be a little easier to navigate stuff later. Sometimes I post stuff on there without advertising about it. So that's kind of like the archive of everything. YouTube if you just search for Joe Grand or Kingpin Empire, it will go to my YouTube channel. I post once in a while, like I'm not a YouTuber, but if there's something worth making a video about, I'll do it. So that goes up there, and I'll link to. I reference other videos from there. That like the Wired one is on their channel, but I link to that. And then Twitter is for more of like the day to day or week to week because I don't use it very often. That's just at Joe Grand, and so that's kind of I say something publicly when there's something worth saying. Otherwise, you don't hear from me. And I appreciate the opportunity too. This is awesome. It's, nice to hear some questions, some different questions and stuff. And it was fun.
Thanks, Joe. You take care, man. Be safe.
All right.
This has been a pleasure, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Barcode patrons, if you like this episode and would like to support the podcast, rate us on Apple Podcasts and visit our Patreon site, patreon.com/barcode podcast. If you're interested in sponsoring the show, check out the barcodepodcast.com/sponsor. Cheers.
Unfortunately, it's time to shut the bar down for this episode. Thanks for stopping in. See you next time. We'll save you a seat. Be sure to check us out at thebarcodepodcast.com.